So here we have a word problem that describes the various transactions that occurred that enabled our place to achieve its opening day. And our job is to read through the word problem and to organize these thoughts on the fundamental accounting equation document to help build the opening day balance sheet. Now notice here that we have defined things a little bit differently. Earlier we mentioned that assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity. Well, when I work with undergraduates at Cornell University, some of them may need a little simpler definition of what an asset or liability is. So to make it simple, and I think describes the relationship somewhat stronger, assets are things. Things that are productive to the generation of your business as a restaurant. Think how unproductive a table service restaurant would be, if you will, without tables and chairs. So those tables and chairs become part of our productive resources. And who provided the things? Well, those are people that made contributions to this enterprise. And there's a distinction between those two people. Depending upon the nature of their contribution, if a promise was made to repay that individual's contribution, it represents a debt that the enterprise took on and is a liability. The other category of people that make contributions are the owners. And unlike the liabilities, the people to whom we've made a promise, there is no guarantee that the owners will get a return on their investment or, in fact, their original investment at all. And for that reason, the distinction that we like to make between these two people is that the people to whom we've made a promise, we have to make good that promise, and the owners, well, our job as management is to answer their prayers. So we're going to look at the opening chronology of our place now and begin to create the opening day balance sheet. So I will read as you follow in your document. A corporation was formed to open and operate a 123-seat table service restaurant. $100,000 of common stock was sold to the organizers and their friends for the seed equity. We use the expression seed equity, not unlike those of you that may perhaps put in a vegetable garden in the summer. We may plant seeds indoors in February or March in this area of the country, and our expectation is that those seeds germinate. And when weather conditions are such that it's frost-free and we can plant, say, these tomato or pepper plants outside in our garden, what's our expectation come the middle of July or August? Well, our expectation is that the tomatoes will have grown on the plant, the peppers will have grown on the plant, and we will reap the harvest of those seeds that were planted in the ground. Well, in a business context, the seed equity is exactly the same thing. We hope that that $100,000 grows into something larger to be harvested and returned to those that made those contributions. So our first entry, we have to decide, well, what is the thing? $100,000 of common stock. Well, that common stock represents cash. So the first thing we're going to do is increase the cash account by $100,000. Now, our understanding of the balance sheet is that the assets, the things, have to equal the people. So we have to have an offsetting entry on the balance sheet so that our balance sheet, such as the name implies, is in balance. And we have to first decide, well, is this a promise or a prayer? And we notice that it was the organizers and their friends, the common stock. That suggests an equity contribution. So we're going to put a zero. We're going to put a zero in the liability column, and our offsetting entry is going to be an increase, and since this contribution was made by family members, we'll make a note of that on our fundamental managerial equation. So right now, if you notice, the things equal the people. We have $100,000 in cash on one side of the equal sign, and the offsetting entry that keeps us in balance is the $100,000 contribution from family and friends, $100,000 worth of common stock. We could draw a line at this point, and I'd ask, are we in balance? And when I ask that question, I'm asking that question in two dimensions. One is the mathematical dimension. Does the $100,000 equal the $100,000? But from an educator's perspective, what perhaps might be more important, are you conceptually in balance? Do you understand why the math is in balance? We keep reading the opening chronology and we find that a construction loan for $325,000 was obtained from a commercial bank. This loan was to be repaid when permanent financing was secured. A suitable site was purchased and a building was constructed. So we have our second entry, a construction loan. Well, again, we have to stop and think, what's the thing? Well, the thing represents more cash. So the cash account is increasing by the amount of the construction loan, $325,000. We now have to stop and think, well, from whom was this contribution provided? And it was from a commercial bank. So we also have to repay this when permanent financing was secured, so clearly this is a promise that must be fulfilled. So we're going to increase the bank that we owe the money to in the same amount of $325,000. To make our entries complete, we have a 0 in the owner's equity column. And we pause now and say, well, are we in balance? What is the total of the things that we have? Well, all we have now is $425,000 in cash. And that cash is balanced by the bank's contribution of $325,000, which we promised to repay, plus the family or the owner's contribution of $100,000. So $425,000 in assets equals the $425,000 in liabilities and owner's equity on the other side of the equal sign. In fact, cash is going to become very important to us, and we're going to start keeping track of the cash balance in our cash account. We'll record the transaction on the left side, and we will keep a running balance on the right side. So to recap, $100,000 equity contribution. I'll indicate those with plus signs, a $325,000 construction loan. So our cash balance at the present time is $425,000. Back to the opening chronology. A suitable site was purchased and a building constructed. The total cost of the facility, including both land and building, was $367,600. Well, sounds like we've used some of the cash. So we are going to reduce cash by $367,600. The question now is, what's going to keep us in balance? Well, unlike the prior transactions that we've noted on the fundamental accounting equation, this is not going to be offset by a change on the other side of the equal sign. We're going to convert this cash and create a temporary account called a facility in the same amount of $367,600. This is a temporary account that will later be converted to two permanent accounts once we find out what the value of the land and the building was upon which this building was constructed. So we make no entries or enter zeros in the liability column, no promise, and there's no change to the prayers. So we have to come over and adjust our cash balance now. $367,600 in cash was used to buy the land and construct the building, which leaves us with a cash balance of $57,400. We're not quite productive as a restaurant yet. We have a ways to go before we open the doors for opening night. At this time, a private investor financed the project with a mortgage of $305,000. In order to protect this investment, this lender requested that the owner contribute $50,000 of additional capital. Now, why might the private investor make this request of the owner? Well, this private investor has financed other restaurant projects prior to this, and they believe that this project is likely to be underfunded from the owner's contribution. So this additional $50,000 of capital is sometimes referred to as the equity cushion. And while the equity cushion sounds like it's something that the owner sits on to protect themselves, it actually is the opposite. That equity cushion serves to protect the lender to better balance the degree of leverage between the owner and the lender's contribution. So since this private mortgage was dependent upon this additional $50,000 equity capital, let's enter that $50,000 equity capital contribution first. So we have to enter another $50,000 in cash. We put a 0 in the liability column. And from whom did we get this additional equity contribution? Well, we went back to our family and friends and raised an additional $50,000 in capital. Our cash balance now has increased by $50,000, $107,400. That satisfied the private investor, who at this time goes ahead and issues us the mortgage of $305,000. So cash goes up in the amount of the mortgage, $305,000, and the offsetting entry for that is an increase to the liabilities in a like amount, $305,000. And at this point, the telephone's ringing. It's the banker. What do they want? Well,